to the Scaling Japan podcast, a podcast about how to grow your business from $100,000 and beyond in the land of the rising sun.
Welcome to the Scaling Japan podcast. I'm your host, Tyson Batino, and on today's episode, we have John Kirch. He is the head of beqom Japan and has been the Japan country manager and APAC leader for multiple cybersecurity and software corporations. Since 1986, John has led multiple teams by planning, establishing, and building a successful presence in the Japanese market for leading foreign technology developers. You'll find few people who have had as much experience in the Japan market for software as John. And today we will be discussing what it takes to successfully introduce and sell enterprise software products and services in the Japanese market. So I'm so glad to have you, John. And could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you very much for the excellent introduction, Tyson. As you mentioned, I've spent a significant part of my career in Japan, actually now well over 30 years. I first came to Japan as an MBA student back in 1984. Subsequently, I worked as a systems architect at Bank of America in Tokyo. After that, I joined Japan's IT industry in 1986 to introduce various new technologies to companies operating in Japan. At beqom, my role is to manage its business operations in Japan. As a brief overview, beqom is a total compensation management software solution focused exclusively on managing compensation and performance, helping business professionals working in HR, finance, and sales to achieve their goals and succeed. We help many of the world's largest companies by enabling them to realize their digital transformation goals by streamlining or optimizing their management of total compensation, rewards, and performance in a manner that is clear, controlled, and transparent, enhancing employment engagement, performance, and profits by enabling the company to use our software system and support services. Today, we currently manage over $300 billion in compensation, and our solution provides companies of any size and industry, including companies such as Fujitsu, Ricoh, BNP Paribas, Fidelity International, Mercedes-Benz, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, DHL, and many other well-known industry leaders with the solutions they need to achieve their reward strategies. Our smallest clients have as few as 300 employees in one country using our system, and our largest clients have over 200,000 employees working in 100 countries around the world. These days, many business professionals working in finance, HR, and sales continually struggle to realize their cloud strategies. Our solution enables them to succeed as it has uncommon flexibility as needed by global organizations. We can do the above because our system can be configured to satisfy the needs of any medium or large-sized organization. And at the same time, our system can enable a company to manage all of its compensation, awards, and performance data in one centralized next-generation SaaS platform running in the cloud on Microsoft Azure.
Thank you for the introduction. And I think one thing I'd like to mention before I start is I have 4 mentors in life, and one of them was a director at Microsoft running part of a very, very crucial part of their business. When I speak with you and I speak with him, I think you both have this uncanny ability to break down the complex into digestible parts to understand. It's interesting just seeing how you guys dissect a lot of complexity in running an organization and making it easier to understand. I'm more focused on the startup route now. Yeah, really, like the further you climb up the chain, let's say your communication style does need to adjust to deal with that level of complexity.
I would say also in tackling any complex problem, you really do need to break it down into chunks or tasks or deliverables that are easily understood and then addressed in the appropriate manner and then put together to create a composite solution. Reducing them into separate items or elements is very, very important.
To dive into things, I want to ask you, what are the general differences for doing market entry for tech and software versus physical goods and services?
I think that both businesses are very important, but there are various characteristics that make them really different. Many, if not most, enterprise software products and services are provided to customers digitally across the internet as software to be deployed on a computer, on a server, or accessible via the cloud. Thus, with many enterprise software products and services, you simply don't have the same challenges or tasks that companies importing physical goods have to spend considerable amount of time and resources. Those tasks include product importing, customs clearance, product insurance, warehousing, delivery, swapping out damaged goods, and then also allowing for product returns due to outdated products or products that have expired. All of that takes a lot of time and effort, I think, in terms of bringing physical goods to market. And for a lot of software products and services, we simply don't have those same challenges. Also, another big difference with physical products is once the physical product is outdated, as I mentioned, you have to either replace it since it is no longer sellable. But with software products that are out of date, well, you can easily push a button, typically, and update the product from one version to the next. So depending upon the type of product, technology products, hardware and software, are like physical products in some respects. And that is when we bring product in, we have to do localization, we have to do marketing, we have to provide support services, we may need to get the product certified, and we have to provide other types of services such as training or professional services that the customer may require. Many technology products are provided in a box or a package, like computers, smartphones, network appliances like network firewalls running on appliances or printers. Accessories such as network cables and power lines also come in boxes or bags. So with those products, though they are technology products, we do have the processes of importing, customs clearance, warehousing, packaging, delivering, but we also have the out-of-the-box experience, like you and Timothy Connor discussed recently in terms of the Apple iPhone. It's amazing the type of skill or expertise that they've applied in making such a top quality out-of-the-box experience. And also with those products, product testing and certification may be needed too. For instance, the telecommunication and radio certification for Japan, TELEC for short, is the approval needed for wireless radio and telecommunication equipment in Japan. But, if you only apply for the PSE electrical certification, it doesn't cover the Wi-Fi. Actually, with an appliance that does Wi-Fi, you need to get both certifications.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that. I think people always underestimate the amount of work you have to do for market entry just to make sure you get everything right. Let's say that you are compliant with the regulations. You're ready to move forward. How do you actually get a Japanese company to consider a foreign solution?
To do that, you really need to understand the market. You need to understand the customer needs and requirements from the point of view of the end user, meaning the solution that you're thinking about, the technology product or the software. Does it solve a problem that is urgently needed by the market? And does it generate, as a result, a high priority for the customer to allocate resources to tackle that problem? This, to me, is one of the most important elements. Understanding the need and the payback from a customer point of view. But also, one needs to understand that, people in Japan are quite risk adverse. And some companies come out with a new product, and right away they're in Japan trying to sell it, sometimes before they have even achieved success in their home market. This, I think, can be an error and generally is. So in order to get Japanese companies to consider a foreign solution, to me, the first step is establish success in your home market. Make it noteworthy. Then understand the Japanese market After that, you're looking for people that can provide you with the right introductions to the right people. So, understanding who are the right people, what are the right companies, which companies have the largest need for the solution that you have to offer. And then other things that might come into play that I think are really important might be product endorsements by key respected organizations such as governments or academia or enterprises. Many times, potential buyers in Japan will consider the message being provided by top executives to be biased because he's the top executive of the technology development company. People that are professors or in academia are sometimes held aloof in Japan because they have a more objective opinion. And this is also true of companies that are in consulting firms. I remember in the old days when I put together a partnership with one of the famous consulting companies in Japan, they said to me, John, we don't want to sign an agreement with you because we want to be able to maintain our objectivity. So I put together with them a trial agreement, enabling them to have training and support services, and so that they could become familiar with our product, but without the obligation to market and sell it. We then commenced to work together. I'll tell you, it was a beautiful partnership because they were providing the business consulting services and we were providing the technical services. And there weren't many companies that we went to that would say no to us, quite frankly. We achieved awesome success.
Gotcha.
Now, in addition to that, product compliance certifications for products, like let's say PCI DSS certification or PSE or ISO 27000 or ISO 27001, those help to remove risk from the end user point of view. And so if they're applicable, I think that they can be very important. Then another item is competitive differentiators. What is it you're offering that has value add? Is it speed? Is it functionality? Is it language support? Is it ease of use? Is you're able to build various types of customized processes without programming through point and click? You do need to have some competitive value add. And then what awards has your company or your product achieved? Those can also help to differentiate you from competitor products.
Could you give some examples of some well-known company and product awards in Japan, or organization who, let's say, evaluate and make decisions for those awards?
I can give you two examples. Actually, one time I was lucky enough to receive the Japan Software Product of the Year Award. And that was back in 1992 for introducing the first integrated client server system in Japanese in Japan. That was integrated with our big data system for modeling and our data warehousing system. It took a lot of work. We developed our own communications code. We localized it. This is before Windows. And we brought it to market. And it was before the internet too. So we were providing basically corporate dashboards, somewhat like a car dashboard, if you will, showing corporate KPIs on the PC screen where the executive, without using the keyboard, in those days, keyboards were not used by senior executives. They would use their finger. So we imported actually a touch screen interface that would go over the PC monitor screen. And basically, we would provide a set of KPIs that were selected by the company in conjunction possibly with a consulting company. And with an executive click, it would go up and it would fetch the data from underlying operational systems, do an ETL, extract, transform, load, do the modeling, and then download the data in the form of a graph, a chart, or a statistical report. And so it was very easy to use. But that's one example. A second example of award is another one where I was introducing a product called a web application firewall to the Japanese market. And this was in the early days of web application firewalls. And I would go to these trade shows and everybody would say, we are PCI DSS compliant. And I would say, what does PCI DSS compliancy mean? What is it that means you can do? And actually, most people wouldn't know. So at the time, the PCI DSS Consortium Board back in Boston did not even have a certification program. I went to a company called TÜV Rheinland, which used to be part of the German government, which is in the product testing business, a multi-billion-dollar company. And I asked them if they would certify my product in their name to comply with PCI DSS standards and give me that certification. They looked at me and they said, sure, we'd be happy to do that, but if you fail one test, there's no certification. So they shared with me their product test plan. We did a lot of work to ensure that our product complied with every step of the test plan. And then we submitted it for their review, and we received the PCI DSS certification. We were the first web application firewall in the world to have that certification. And subsequent to that, we moved forward and we signed several of the Japanese credit card companies that are leaders in Japan. And the reason why they went with us was that they could see their amount of effort analysis would go down considerably, and they would have a higher degree of stability or lack of anxiety that would go along with implementing their product. For about a year and a half or so, we had just an incredible run on the market until our competitors basically started copying us and doing the same.
Gotcha. And I guess for the credit card companies and too, for them just to even figure out how to test your system itself, like would they even really have the resources and knowledge?
Oh, exactly. Very, very difficult to test because those PCI DSS guidelines are very complex. I mean, pages and pages of different types of criteria necessary to meet those standards.
And another thing you mentioned was product endorsements by key respected organizations, but it kind of reminded me of often with language learning products in Japan, they'll have some university professor who say endorses it, and it's pretty common to happen actually. And when I see a product, I'm like, I'm waiting for it. When is the professor coming up? I know he's coming up soon.
Well, let me give you two stories in that regard. One point, I was offering a network firewall to the Japanese market that had been endorsed by the U.S. government. And as a result of that endorsement from the U.S. government, because of the special relationship between Japan and the United States, actually, most of the top organizations in the Japanese government became my client. So I was doing systems for the Japanese Congress, the Ministry of Tax, the Supreme Court, the Bank of Japan, and many other very well-known organizations throughout the Japanese government. And quite frankly, I don't think that would have been possible if I did not have that U.S. government endorsement. But we also had the only network firewall in the world that had never had one published vulnerability ever. And a lot of our competitors had dozens of them on a weekly basis. So our products stood out, not only in terms of quality, but also in terms of endorsement. Another story for you is that when I was introducing data warehousing and big data to Japan, we actually collaborated with a professor at Yokohama National University as a strategic advisor. And then we built or put together study groups of representatives of leading Japanese companies to visit universities such as MIT, Northwestern University, as well as the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, to basically sit down and study for several days with leading professors at those universities. And the advisor from the Yokohama National University was basically like a communications liaison between many of the Japanese executives that attended the study tour. And then later, he actually wrote over 40 books in Japanese about balanced scorecard and the use of business intelligence systems. And so that partnership was incredibly successful, but it came from a very, very special relationship between that professor and the CEO of the company I was representing in Japan. And again, the power of relationship played a pivotal role in terms of ensuring that the professor was maximizing his capabilities to optimize our success.
That was actually going to be my next question, but you answered it there. And what are some other activities and initiatives you can employ to market your technology in Japan?
There are all kinds of activities that you can do in Japan to market your product. I think that some of them might be for localizing your data sheets, your videos, your use cases, making available product demos, product evaluations to prospective clients to try your product out with their people in terms of setting it up and running it so they can see that they can understand what it takes to put it together or get it configured. and they can see that they can operate it. And that gives them confidence that if they use it, they'll be able to actually use it constructively. Press releases in Japanese are very useful. Partner web pages, providing content, collaborating with partners to co-sponsor webinars, roundtables, leveraging social media such as Facebook or LinkedIn. Cold calling, I think, is important. You know your product, you know the problems that it can address, and so you're in a very, very good situation to understand who it can help. And just because you don't have a relationship there, I think that there's still a very good reason to communicate them, to let them know what you could possibly do to assist and support them in terms of growing their business and achieving success. Collaboration with thought leaders, as I already mentioned, study trips, user conferences, both overseas and domestically, and sales incentives or sales contest, not only for your employees, but for your resellers and your distributors. All of that can be helpful. But I'd like to kind of highlight one thing that's really, really important, and that is having an attractive business model, a commitment to the market, a sense of humor, and a great deal of patience in terms of moving forward one step at a time to achieve success.
You mentioned study trips. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. It really depends upon the product. I wouldn't say this is something that everybody should do, but when you're bringing new product into the market, one of the big problems is lack of awareness of the product, its benefits. And so when you're in that type of position, being able to leverage overseas knowledge, talent, insights to educate the Japanese managers and executives can help you to receive their active support, to help to address any type of risk they may perceive, and for them to understand the potential benefits that you can generate for them if they come on board. We did that when I was working at a company called ComShare International. It was a very, very successful marketing program.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Scaling Japan. In addition to serving as your fine host, I also provide advisory and coaching services to business owners who want to 2x, 5x, and even 10x their business. So stop holding your company and your team and your employees back, and let me help you and your company scale. Find more information at scalingyourcompany.com. Now back to the episode. Cool, thanks for sharing that. I guess for on the technology end, is there any certain channels for press releases that you recommend?
I would recommend those that have a high degree of usage by Japanese organizations, of course, especially within your target industry or market segment. So the question is, who are you selling to? And then which Japanese publications are using those wire services? And I think it's most important to provide that content in Japanese. Many times, if you simply publish it in English, let's say in the United States or Europe, it may not be picked up in Japan. Many times in the past, I would do publishing of press releases concurrently in English and Japanese.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I'm only familiar with PR Times. There's probably a lot of different services out there.
Yeah, the key question to ask the wire service is, who are your customers in Japan? I mean, is it Nikkei, newspapers, which magazines? And then you can correlate those magazines to your user base and what publications they're reading. And so it really depends upon who you're selling to, what is your target market, and which publications they read, and which of those are basically being serviced by the PR wire service.
And I wanted to add one more example. I think this is more of a newer marketing channel, but with the creation of startup cities like Fukuoka, Sapporo, Kobe, I think Hamamatsu now is trying to get their hands in there, and of course Tokyo. And I think for Tokyo, Shibuya is making a lot of effort. And we did interview someone from Fukuoka Startup Center. They are big cities. They have a lot of corporations there, and they would like to attract new technology, high-paying jobs. That will also have like a snowball effect, but they want to make their cities a bigger business hub. And so a lot of cases they actually have teams of people who will, if you're doing your market entry to Japan, they'll introduce you to potential corporations in the area. You would bring an existing product or service, and they would help you launch it with your first potential client because they want you to set a base in their city.
Right.
And they'll also give you some tax incentives. So I think there might be like reduced taxes, corporate taxes in some cases. Other one is they'll provide you a subsidy for hiring someone in that city.
Well, I think it's really fantastic. Those different cities are putting together those types of startup programs, helping startups to get their feet on the ground and possibly move forward to achieve success. And I think they certainly offer a solid base by which companies can get established and get moving. Actually today, because of technology, there is a shift that occurred after the start of the pandemic. And that is a lot of people are working remotely. And so where you're based geographically is actually less important than it used to be. But I still maintain that in this world of marketing and selling enterprise software products, having that face-to-face communication over a coffee or a meal or over the boardroom table is still vitally important. But it doesn't take that much time to fly from Fukuoka to Tokyo. I have met companies from Fukuoka, at trade shows in Tokyo. I have signed companies in Fukuoka myself, as well as in Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya. And they are important markets at various stages of the game. And it really depends upon your resources that you have. But sometimes being based in Fukuoka gives you special access to talent in Fukuoka that in Tokyo might be too expensive. So there are benefits to be had.
So with that being said, now that you've kind of made the decision on what type of marketing channels you try to enter the market to help the audience, so what is more of the buying decision process like for many companies?
I thought that Timothy Connor, when he was speaking with you the other day, said it very well, and that everything in Japan takes 3 times as long as in leading Western markets. And so you've got to keep that in mind. So getting started as soon as possible is always a good idea. And then there are different interest groups within Japanese organizations. You can't just talk to one person. You need to speak to different people at different levels of the organization, and you need to address different types of concerns and needs and requirements. And so offering that product evaluation is a great way to win people over, where they can see the benefits, they can understand the ease of use, they can understand that product technology can help them. And quite frankly, whenever I do the product evaluations, I like to focus on the most difficult piece of the job as opposed to the most easiest. Because if I can do the most difficult, then doing the easy part, everybody accepts that. So it's easy to move forward. So it takes time. You need to provide information. You need to make presentations. And if you do that well, and your product is sound and you have good support services, then there's a good chance that you can move forward to a successful agreement.
At least in my case as well, like if I were working with a big corporation, what kind of level of support are they expecting? But if you could elaborate a little bit more on the support end,
Sure.
I think that would be really useful.
It really depends upon the type of product that you're providing to the market and the amount of time it's being used by the customer. Is it being used 7/24? Is it used only during the workday? Is it a product like, let's say, a word processor where everybody in the company is using it? Or is it more of a security product that's sitting in the background where a few security engineers are basically looking at the GUI and that's it? And the reason why that's important is that it will define how much localization you need to do. So if you're providing a product that is used by the rank and file managers, employees, and executives of a company, basically everything in the GUI, all the information content needs to be localized. But if you're providing a system like a security product, then really you don't need to do so much localization. It might be the training, it might be the user manual, the data sheets, the PowerPoint presentations. But understanding that from the end user point of view of what is a successful degree of localization is very, very important. So basically, in terms of moving forward to achieve success and provide service, I think it's understanding things from the end user's point of view as to what they need to be successful. And then working with the different interest groups, including the procurement department sometimes, to achieve that consensus, that positive decision. And then you can move forward to deploy your system successfully.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, if it is a big tech solution and they're implementing it in their company, they're busy enough as it is just trying to do the day-to-day of their own company. They don't have the resources to try to figure out everything on their own, how to make it work for their company.
Right.
Plus, you're the expert on your product.
Exactly. And so you need to transfer information to help them become rock stars, experts in the product as well, according to their needs and requirements. So, if you can do everything from A to Z, but they only need A to D, then you teach them how to do A to D without doing all that other stuff. And that's another reason why it's very important to understand needs and requirements of the end user.
Have you ever found yourself having trouble creating a business plan? Do you pretty much operate on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, creating confusion and chaos in your organization? If that sounds like you, I recommend you join my Entrepreneur Bootcamp. In my bootcamp, you'll set an achievable but challenging revenue target for the current or following fiscal year, and we will create a business plan to make it a reality. See more in the show notes below. And now back to our episode. This is kind of a newbie question, but you mentioned procurement department. And at what stage of a company would they actually have a procurement department as opposed to maybe just a founder or?
I think it comes down to the size of the company and whether or not it's publicly listed. And that's where the procurement departments are typical. Most companies in Japan I've worked with have not had procurement departments. But if you're talking with some of the largest companies in Japan, actually it's quite typical that a procurement department representative, after the overall decision is made, will also get involved, and they will look to receive some sort of value add from their contribution in the decision cycle. And so one of the important things to do is not give away everything that you can out of your back pocket in terms of discounts and other offers, but you have to reserve some, quite frankly, for other people that may be involved in the decision cycle. So many times in terms of selling products, you can only go so far before you can't go any further. So it's an important thing to do is to keep a small reserve so that you can satisfy the needs of other people that may come after the end user decision.
Is it the case where maybe the procurement department is very intertwined with the finance department?
Well, they'd like to be able to say that as a result of their effort, their contribution in terms of speaking with you, they were able to receive some additional benefit for the company. And many times that benefit that they're looking for is a further discount.
Cool. No, thank you. I think I got it now. And what are some other factors that play a big role in the buying decision?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, there are many factors that play a big role in the buying decision, but I'll try to hit on the top most important ones. Of course, product suitability, budget, urgency, brand of the provider, value add, those are all very important. But there are other things in Japan that are also important. And in that area, I would add things such as the relationship between the people involved, meaning the relationship between the providing company and the prospective firm. Are they in the same group of companies between those firms? Is there a relationship between the markets of the provider and the company in Japan, or between organizations? But in addition to that, you would add other things such as trust. It's really, really hard to build trust. It takes time, but it's important to have that, especially when you're providing big enterprise solutions. The perception of risk. Many Japanese companies have said to me, well, who are your other users in Japan? And I say, well, you're going to have the honor of being the first customer we have in Japan. And they look at me and they say, well, let me think about this. We'll get back to you if we're interested. But Japanese organizations in general really don't want to be the first in Japan to try out your product because they feel like they're kind of guinea pigs. They would like to know that other companies have stepped forward and used your product successfully. And that helps to pave the way in terms of minimizing risk. Regulatory compliance can be very important, as I mentioned earlier. But in addition to that, support services in Japanese. I mean, do you have people that can teach the customer in Japanese how to use your product? When the customer has a problem, he picks up the telephone or sends an email. Do you have people providing support services that can receive that email or that telephone call and provide him with a timely response? Product localization, has that been achieved to the degree needed by the Japanese firm? In addition, ease of deployment. How long will it take to deploy? How complicated is it? The business model, is it attractive, either from an end user point of view or from a reseller or a distributor point of view? The business model needs to be solid and make sense. And then finally, concerns about network and data security need to be addressed as well. So those are some of the other things that I think that are very, very important in terms of playing a big role in the buying decision.
And you mentioned, I think, like support services in Japanese. As part of like the sales discussion, would you recommend maybe bringing a Japanese person with you to a meeting?
Yes, I do. It doesn't necessarily require that you bring them to the first meeting, but in terms of simply introducing the company and the product, but subsequently, yes, it is important to bring Japanese representatives with you so that the Japanese customer, whether or not it's a reseller, a distributor, or an end user, can understand that when they have a question or they need training, they can receive communication, support services in a manner in which their staff feel comfortable.
Thank you. And I think you gave some examples above, like if I'm let's say, an American company, I would like to break into the Japan market. If I have these endorsements, I have awards from, let's say, international organizations can help. But I think some of the listeners, they're probably, I think there'll be some listeners who are foreigners and who are actually developing their enterprise product in Japan. And they're looking to get their first enterprise customer. And in that case, would you have any tips for them on getting their first enterprise customer in Japan?
Yes, I would. I would say it really depends upon value add. And I think there are quite a few different companies have foreign characteristics that are based in Japan that have achieved that type of success. It really came down to the value add of their product solution, their Japanese capabilities, and relationships they had with people in Japan and organizations in terms of getting their first customers. You know, if you have something that generates value add, that makes a company more competitive, enables them to move faster, do things better, generate more revenue, make more profit, or, you know, protect their data from a cybersecurity point of view, there's a lot of people that will pay attention. But, you know, if what you're offering is very similar to a Japanese product that is provided by a fully Japanese company and supported in Japanese and has big market share, and you really don't have much to show but price, but no real value add in terms of capability, features, capabilities. Quite frankly, the road in front of you is going to be pretty steep.
And I think it goes back to what you're saying. It's really, do you have an attractive business model?
Do you have something that you can provide to the end user, which is unique, uncommon, that he needs to have to expand his company's success?
It's more of an American example, but I think the CEO of Coinbase said, you have to make something where someone will say, just shut up and take my money. Of course, I wouldn't use that same context, like that level of aggression for Japan, but I just use that quote to create a business model or a product that adds so much value that it eliminates a lot of the having to try to prove yourself.
I would say you're right. I mean, quite frankly, Coinbase has an awesome reputation. They achieved success early on. They were in the market before most of the companies in the crypto arena. And they built a very large company with significant investment, and they grew their business, and they also provided liquidity for a lot of people that were investing in cryptocurrencies, which was more liquidity than most of their competitors. And as a result of that, I was not surprised in the least to hear last week that they are actually setting up an office in Singapore. And Singapore is a very vibrant cryptocurrency market, as is South Korea. And, you know, given that this is happening, I think it's only a matter of time that before you might see Coinbase, you know, actually setting up an office in Japan and hiring a significant number of people.
Yeah, and I could definitely see them out competing CoinCheck, I think. Moving on, it's what are some potential deal breakers that a foreigner might not be aware of?
I think the first one is one that I already referred to, and that is the foreigner that comes to Japan trying to sell his product first in the Japanese market, who is a member of a foreign company. I think there's a big difference between being a foreigner and setting up a company in Japan and trying to get your first sales here, and being a foreigner affiliated with a company that is overseas and trying to get your first sales here. Coming from overseas is much more of a challenge because this is not your home market. So that's one thing. Other types of potential deal breakers might be the company that you're talking to doesn't have any available resources to deploy your product in terms of working with it on a project management basis, applying resources to deploy the product successfully in Japan. But they don't tell you this. Something else that might be a problem would be perhaps the company you're talking to might be the member of a group of companies where another member of that group is offering a competitive product. And so because the company you're talking to is a member of that group, they may feel some degree of loyalty or allegiance to not adopting a product that's competitive to that which is being sold by another member of that group. So that is something to be aware of. Or sometimes it could be that the company you're talking to, maybe their affiliate company has invested, like in an angel round or a second round or a third round, into a startup in the US or in Europe that is a key competitor of yours. Again, the same feelings of allegiance or loyalty will come into play, and that could be a deal breaker. In addition to that, it may be that the company you're talking to is a private firm, and that private firm doesn't need to publicly publish their financial results. And so that company may have considerable amount of debt on its books, and it may not be profitable at all. Because of that, it may destroy any chances that you have of successfully concluding an agreement, but it would be hard for you to understand that that is the reason. And then it may be that the company that you're talking to, let's say it's a potential partner or distributor or reseller, maybe their skills and capabilities are aimed at, let's say, the small, medium enterprise market in Japan, whereas your product is really focused on the high end or maybe on government. And so you're talking to this famous company, but their skills and capabilities are focused in a direction that are not well aligned with your needs and requirements if they were to become your partner. And you may not be aware of that. So basically, understanding your partners, doing the analysis, the homework to understand their situation is always a good thing to do.
Yeah, all of those make perfect sense. Yeah, the one that I often see with a lot of SaaS companies, especially if they're targeting SMEs, is especially smaller sized businesses. There's no one in the company who can actually implement the system. And so,
well,
like,
actually, I utilize that very concept to help pioneer a market in Japan that's called MSS, or Managed Security Services. And that is where we would equip various companies with our products for network firewalls and VPNs. And then they would have a SOC, a security operating center, inside that company. And they would basically enable the end user to outsource their needs and requirements for security to the provider of the security service. And so I used to work with a variety of companies in Japan and providing that. Companies like Otsuka Shokai, AT&T, IIJ, Internet Initiative Japan, PSINet, Netmarks, and various others in terms of bringing the MSS market to fruition in Japan. And I'm happy to tell you that now thousands upon thousands of companies across Japan are using MSS services, and it's now a commodity.
And that is a good point. That could actually be a market opportunity.
You know, where there are problems, if you can come up with a solution, you have an opportunity. So I look for problems.
Awesome. And I'm pretty sure a question that probably a lot of listeners will have too is, how do we get to the decision maker?
Getting to the decision maker is many times a challenge. I would say that to get to the decision maker, you might want to try to build a relationship with his top lieutenants so that you're basically working one step down And the reason why it's a good idea to be working with those people as opposed to the decision maker is that if you go straight to the decision maker, you're basically putting all your cards on the table in one go, but you really don't know the decision maker. You don't know his style of doing business. You don't know what his priorities are. You don't know how he likes to work. But if you work with his lieutenants, they can fill you in. And so you can basically prepare to introduce your product or service in a way that meets with the needs, requirements, the style of the top decision maker. Besides that, introductions by customers, friends, past customers, partners are great. I've had customers in the past where my customer, let's say Coca-Cola Japan, for instance, the CTO introduced me to the CTO at another very famous company in Japan, actually one of the oldest foreign companies in Japan. And the CFO there called me up and said, John, I heard what you did at Coca-Cola. We want you to do the same for us. I've already got the budget allocated. Could you please come over and discuss our needs and requirements with us? It was fantastic. But I love those types of referrals. Another one is senior executive visits by the company, by the executives of the company that you're representing. Because when you bring in a senior executive from a foreign company, from the United States, from the Silicon Valley, or from Boston, into a boardroom in Tokyo, that company feels compelled to reciprocate. And that is to bring out their senior executive, their CFO or their CEO, to participate in the meeting. So that's a great way to get access to the decision maker. Another way is, and I've used this strategy, is basically to go after a target company's competitors. And that is, if it's difficult for you to access that target company, you go to the companies that they compete against, and you take care of all those companies. And then once you've done that, you contact that target company again. Many times you will find that there is a definite change of attitude or interest in meeting with you. That has worked for me in the past.
How would you word it to them if you were to mention it to them?
Well, you don't need to tell them that that's what you're doing, but there are different markets here. For instance, if I were to sell a system, let's say Toyota, I do something good for them. It would be pretty easy to cascade down the industry chain of ranking companies in the automobile industry. However, if I took it from the other point of view of first I did a system for Daihatsu or Suzuki, and then I tried to use that to leverage myself to kind of embellish my capabilities, let's say, to Toyota, that probably won't work. So basically, it comes to putting together the appropriate strategy of leveraging your past experience, your knowledge of different industry needs, and then sometimes having an industry focus can be very, very productive. Now, the last one I had in terms of answering your question about how to get to the decision maker is simply to participate in industry events, conferences, other types of panels, roundtables that are frequented by senior management executives. Because if you do that, you may be rubbing elbows with some of the largest companies in Japan or from abroad.
For a lot of listeners, this might be their first time onboarding Japanese clients. And I'm sure a lot of the processes are the same. But what are your tips for successfully onboarding a client in Japan?
Well, I think that the first step really is understanding the needs and requirements of the customer to be successful. And so what is it do they want to achieve by when? So if you understand that, that's the first step. And then after that, you can put together and propose a plan whereby you are serving to accommodate their needs and requirements as much as possible. And then you can sit down and negotiate and discuss the gaps of wherever they might be and come up with a mutual agreed plan. But basically, I like to employ my old phrase of ready, aim, fire in terms of understanding needs and requirements and then providing them with a proposal and then reaching agreement. And then after that, do things that you promise on time, on budget, and do it with the right people, the people that have the qualifications to deliver. Let's say product training or product demonstrations or product support. And then by doing that, you start to build confidence, you build trust. When the customer has a problem, reach out and help. even if you haven't agreed to do so in the past, even if it's outside your set of deliverables, make the extra effort to help the customer be successful. In fact, many times what I will do is I will promise a certain set of deliverables to the customer, and then on purpose, I will provide a little bit more than what the customer expects to build goodwill and to build good partnership. Also, many times in the West, we take it for granted that when people have a problem, they'll ask a question. But actually in Japan, that's not true. And so I believe in providing what I call proactive support. And that means that I will periodically meet with a customer or a partner, provide them with updates that I think they might need or require. And I'll ask some questions about whether or not they have any questions or concerns. Don't wait for them to raise their hand and say, I need some help. When you're providing certain types of goods and services to some customers in Japan, they cannot afford to go down. They need 6 nines in terms of product reliability and uptime. And so the only solution to that is providing proactive support to ensure and to optimize service availability. And then I do some other things too. And that is, for instance, when I onboard a client, I might go out of my way, let's say if they're a distributor or a reseller, in terms of introducing them to potential customers, new resellers, if you will, but helping them to take advantage of my experience, my background, in terms of getting their first success. And it might not be more than just one time, but by doing that, again, you're putting your best foot forward, and this helps to build partnership. And many times in Japanese companies, the Japanese salespeople will only sell the products that they know. And so if they don't know your product and service, if they haven't experienced success, they will actually shy away from it. And so one way to counter that is that you bring the customer prospects and you work with them to close them. And pretty soon they have the knowledge, they have the confidence that they can do it themselves. So you can short circuit that fear of new products by doing it this way.
Awesome. And my last question would be, what are your tips for successful customer service?
I think that one of the most important things a country manager can do in Japan is to coach his head office on the needs and requirements that Japanese companies have to be successful, to let them know what they need to provide in their own product and service so that the product or service is acceptable to Japanese companies. In addition to that, for providing successful customer service, again, it's listening, understanding needs and requirements, priorities in terms of those, and then putting together a plan to ensure that the customer or the partner receive those needs that they've identified. And then, as I mentioned before, being proactive, encouraging open communications, encouraging the Japanese partner or user to ask you questions. And when they have a problem, go out of your way to help them get back on their feet and to recover. And this will also build partnership and trust, goodwill between both organizations. And then, ensure that people are trained. When you agree that plan with the senior executives, go out of your way to train their people and help those people to be successful.
One mistake I sometimes see is just because the staff is Japanese, don't assume they can provide Japanese level customer service naturally.
Absolutely true. Absolutely. Just because they're Japanese, don't assume anything, but make sure that they're trained and capable. It's just like English. I mean, just because you speak English, does that mean you can do podcast? Probably
No,
not.
definitely
Or does that mean you can write a press release that is well received by the market? And it's true also in Japanese that just because they speak Japanese doesn't mean that they have the marketing skills, the sales skills, or the management skills.
Thank you very much. Do you have any requests for the listeners, and where can they find you?
I do have some requests. And first of all, I'd like to say I would be very pleased to invite the listeners to visit beqom's webpage. And that's at www.beqom.com. And beqom is spelled BEQOM. Secondly, I'd be very happy to welcome any direct messages, questions, comments via LinkedIn in Japanese or English. If anybody doesn't agree with my comments, my opinions, or what I've stated, I'm very happy for them to contact me, and I'd be happy to discuss that with them. And then finally, I'd just like to give a big shout out to you, a big thank you for sponsoring this podcast and for the questions that you've asked and for the time that you spent in preparing it and executing it. But it's been a pleasure, Tyson, to speak with you.
Yeah, and this has been a real pleasure to speak with you as well, John. And I really liked how we really dived in deep, because I think a lot of the questions that we focused on, like how to give good support, onboarding, reaching the decision maker, also just kind of how to break in and kind of get that, how to establish trust. I think that's something that a lot of companies who are trying to introduce tech-related services or products in Japan are really having a hard time with.
It's really tough to establish trust, and it takes a long time. And that's why it's so helpful in building a business to leverage trust that has already been created, either between people or between companies or between organizations. And if you can do that, it can help to accelerate your success in Japan.
Awesome. And I agree 100%. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your time and for your questions. I look forward to the opportunity of speaking with you again in the future.